Okay, here's where we were in the previous video. You'll notice that the demand curve and average revenue curve here, the marginal revenue curve lies below and slants steeper than the demand curve in the less than purely competitive case. The first thing to look for is where does marginal revenue equal marginal costs, because that's the point where either profits are going to be maximized or losses minimized. So we look for where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Here's marginal revenue here. Here's marginal cost here. Here is where the two intersect. Now I just drew those curves up here kind of randomly. There is nothing particularly important about it intersecting there at the lowest point of the average total cost curve. That was just by accident. Okay, so the point where they intersect, that's going to be the point where the firm is going to produce, because that is going to be the quantity that maximizes its profits. Now, what's it going to sell those that output for? What's going to be the unit price? It's going to charge the highest price it possibly can, of course, because consistent with selling all of these and leaving no unwanted inventory in the warehouse. So it's going to charge the highest price it can, and that information is given to us by the demand curve. So if we draw the line from Q1 up to the demand curve and over, we will see that at price P1, Q sub 1, the profit maximizing quantity, will be precisely the quantity that is demanded. So the firm will produce Q sub 1 and charge P sub 1 price. Now, is the firm making a profit? In order to find that out, we compare the average revenue, that's average revenue right there, AR. Can you read that? I'm glad you can, because I can't. Of course, I'm trying to read it upside down. Average revenue, here's average revenue, and average total cost, here's average total cost. At this quantity right here, here is average revenue, right here, and here is average total cost, right there. Here then is average revenue minus average total cost. That is per unit profit. Of course, we could shade this area in to get our total profit here. So the firm is making profits. Now, what would happen if the firm were making profits in a purely competitive industry? I'll tell you. Other firms would enter. This would drive the price down, and eventually all economic profits would be eliminated. But why does the monopolist exist? The monopolist exists because there are barriers to entry. So other firms are trying to enter this industry to take advantage of these economic profits, can't get in because of whatever barrier to entry may exist. And so as long as the monopolist is maximizing his profits, the monopolist is in equilibrium. So there we are, equilibrium. Now let's look at our efficiency conditions to check out the efficiency. First, allocative efficiency. Let's compare price and marginal cost. At this quantity right here, that output, here is the price, here, draw it over, is the marginal cost. Draw that line up to the marginal cost curve and over. You will see that price at equilibrium exceeds marginal cost. The price is the value of this product. The marginal cost is the value of the alternative product, the sacrifice, that could have been made with these resources. The society is saying, we value this product more than we do this product. Give us more, give us more, give us more. But the firm is not giving the society more. The firm is giving the society, producing too few units. The society wants more. Price exceeds marginal cost, but the firm is not giving them more. So we can see that resources are not allocated efficiently. There are not enough resources going into this industry because at equilibrium, price is equal to marginal cost. Now let's check out productive efficiency. Productive efficiency is how effectively the resources that are being used in the industry are being utilized. Is the output being produced at the lowest per unit cost? Well, unfortunately, I have it, the way I have it drawn here, is that it does indeed appear that the average total cost is being minimized. But notice that I just drew it randomly. There is no force that is going to cause the unit price of the output to be minimized. There is not going to be a force, as there was in pure competition, that requires the unit cost be minimized. So the idea then is productive efficiency might not be achieved. There's no theorem that says productive efficiency will definitely be achieved. Okay? So here is our pure monopoly model, and of course this this explanation begins, I believe, on page 275, figure 13.4 is an illustration of this. Now let's talk about some other issues that are included in Chapter 13. Specifically, let's talk about antitrust issues. The term trust is the old-timey phrase that was used for monopoly. Rather than monopoly, they called it trust. So antitrust policy is really anti-monopoly policy. Now, the first antitrust act was the Sherman Act of 1890. And this outlawed conspiracies and combinations that restricted or restrained trade. Now, in 1911, a very significant case was the Standard Oil case. I mentioned this in the previous video. The Standard Oil case. You all know Standard Oil. Today it's called Exxon. Standard Oil owned a huge share of the entire industry. They were able to manipulate price by increasing output or reducing output. This would affect the market supply and therefore the market price. And so they were considered a monopolist. But the way they became a monopolist is that they were using illegitimate ways of absorbing other firms and getting rid of competition. So the Sherman Act of 1890 was brought to bear against Standard Oil in 1911. They ultimately found Standard Oil guilty of violating the Sherman Act and broke them up into 33 competing companies. You can see the idea behind that. But in that court case, the so-called rule of reason was established. The rule of reason states that monopoly by itself, monopoly per se, is not bad if it was generated legitimately, organically, through technological progress by becoming an economy of scale. Monopoly per se is not bad. Per se means by itself. Monopoly per se is not bad. In order to find a firm with significant market power in violation of the Sherman Act, it has to have come by that significant monopoly power by illegitimate ways. Okay, so the Sherman Act can be divided into two components. The per se rule. The per se rule says that combinations and restraint of trade are per se illegal. That by itself is all that needs for you to get a conviction. However, monopoly is not per se a violation of the Sherman Act. In order to determine if a monopolist is in violation of the Sherman Act, we have to use the rule of reason. Did the monopoly become a monopoly by legitimate reasons, good management, taking advantage of technology, or illegitimate reasons? Okay. Now, there are other issues regarding the rule of reason and the Sherman Act. Make sure that you read that about the antitrust policy. There will be questions concerning antitrust on the 8th quiz, Chapter 13. Post questions and comments to the discussion board.